Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igwe. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. A leaked memo from the US State Department indicates that the Trump administration is weighing reducing America's diplomatic presence in Africa as part of its broader efforts to slash government spending. How could a smaller US presence affect diplomatic ties and development efforts across Africa? Nigeria has taken a significant step towards regional economic integration by submitting its tariff schedule to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The plan targets zero tariffs on 90% of goods and includes a 50% tariff cut for products from less developed African countries by 2025. Alongside this, Nigeria is expanding efforts in digital trade, aiming to simplify cross-border e-commerce and payment systems. Why is this coming now, 5 years after the country ratified the agreement? SBM Intelligence latest Jollof Rice Index titled Staple Under Stress revealed a sharp rise in food costs in Nigeria. The price of cooking one pot of jollof rice surged from 21,300 in September 2024 to 25,486 naira by March 2025, an increase of nearly 20%, while in Ghana it went up 79% in the same 6-month period. What staple food becoming less affordable? How will families and policymakers respond to the growing pressures of food inflation? Joining us today for more insights is Samuel Atiku. Welcome, Samuel, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on the program.
It's always great having you. Let's begin with the US diplomatic retrenchment in Africa. Could this shift create a vacuum that other global powers like China, Russia, or EU might rush to fill? And also, how might this alignment affect Africa's strategic autonomy?
I think there are a couple of things one need to think about, and I'll circle back to my opinion at the end. But I think it's important to put this in perspective. If you look closely at the US government itself, the arrangement and by design, their entire diplomacy and the US diplomatic presence in Africa has always wind around a couple of things. And the first one is about the soft power and the influence they have. And if you look closely at the US, right, their diplomatic network, it's not just about the politics. It goes and it runs deep. For instance, if you talk about democracy in Africa, they seem to be using their wit and their powers to actually get that on board. If you go to the education sector, that's what you'll see all over you. It's there for everybody to see. They have one way or the other of influencing the kind of education that we get and what and the mode of education we get, whether we like. And you see a lot of people getting scholarships, traveling, having those, whether you call it formal education or I will call it the sub. For instance, if you go to the CBN, it's not uncommon for you to see most of the people, the executive directors in the CBN, going maybe to the US or going somewhere to learn something or the other. If you look closely again at the security architecture of the region, let's say, for instance, the West African region, Sub-Saharan Africa in total, they have one way or the other a way of influencing it. You know how Nigeria had to bend right, left just to get some US weapon back then when President Jonathan was fighting Boko Haram, and then you know what happened in there. So it moves, and then they use their fortune to influence a whole lot of that. The second angle is the development and the humanitarian assistance that they give to people. You know, in Africa, it's hard to say we have a lot of people that are facing, they go through a whole lot of things. If you talk about the food crisis, you talk about refugee issues, you talk about disease and ailment. The US government typically have development assistance to us, and then by extension, also humanitarian assistance. I'll come back to that later. Then you look at the counterterrorism or what you call anti-terrorism initiative that you see going around, whether it's within the Lake Chad Basin, where you have Boko Haram ravaging there, or you want to go to the Sahel, or you want to go to the Horn of Africa. The US diplomatic systems have a lot of footprint around that area. And then more importantly, I think I'll use the word deprioritization itself. If the US now presume that it's time to scale back, that could signal to the entire world that the US seems to be deprioritizing Africa, as it were. And Africa, whether we like it or not, in terms of the scale of things, people still believe that Africa does not necessarily sit high in terms of the strategic priorities of the US. But scaling back even worsens those situations. But now to my own opinion, I know the whole thing is that, it's an opportunity for China to set in. It's an opportunity for China to step in. I think it's important for us to be careful here. If you look closely at the total spending of Ghana on development, on international development, it comes down to about 2.3, if I'm not right. I mean, people could fast check me on that, but I know it's less than $3 billion. US spending, especially for development, if you look at USAID alone, it's getting close, it's range between 21 to $50 billion. You could see go of difference that you in there. I mean, China presently just feels a very tiny void in the scale of things. And what I mean in terms of action is simple. That BC vaccine that you see a child taking, one way or the other, it has the footprint of the US there. If you look at the routine vaccines that you see through Gavi, if you look, most Nigerians, whether we like it or not, infant mortality is very high in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And those people are dying needlessly because of preventable this thing. If you look at the reason why life expectancy had gone up from 40 to about 50 something in Nigeria now, it has to do in Nigeria. I'm using Nigeria for context, but if you look closely at Africa, it even goes beyond that. It's massive. That vaccine that people are getting is because of this humanitarian support. Now, scaling it down, you know what the implication that means. I know people say, Africa should be able to step in. Let me shock you. Nigeria is a rich country in Africa, and a lot of people still die in Nigeria. Whether it's malnutrition, whether it's under 5 death, if you look at its indices, it's all there, whether it's pregnancy-related death. I mean, you could go front and back. I mean, I was looking at the data for Zamfara, for instance. Less than 30% of births that you have in Zamfara happens in health facility. Less than, so for every 10 person they give birth, only 3 happens in medical facilities. And if you go into those medical facilities, what you will see there will make you cry, right? Now, you have to put that in context that Nigeria is still a rich country, and you could look at the implication across Africa. So my big fear is that I don't think China or Russia or all these people will come in and fill the void that the US will be leaving. And I don't think African leaders themselves and the economy of Africa is prepared to undo and begin to address some of the key challenges this void will open up. And in terms of the impact itself on the economy, I know people will say, we should get ourselves over this thing. The truth is that people will die before you get things over the line. And the question is that, do people need to die before we get into that, before we begin to take corrective measures? I think that's the sad part that's the sad part about what I see happening when it comes to the new policy of the US government. And I mean, we could circle that, and I think I've just read there so that I don't begin to rant. US scaling down their humanitarian support and development support to Africa will have very, very negative impact. And I'm not sure any country in the world is ready to come on board and close those voids. I can't find that. In fact, the UK is also scaling down. I don't think China, I don't think Russia or any of these countries will come in to actually close the void. If they will come to Africa, one thing is very clear. They are coming to Africa because of what they presume will work best for their own economy. And unfortunately, when you look at that child that is being born in Africa, maybe in a remote area without health facility, what we most likely will come down to is the fact that we begin to see a reversal of gains that we've seen over the last years. And it's sad to say that that's where we find ourselves, unfortunately.
Hmm. I mean, when you were speaking earlier, you spoke about the US soft power and looking at the cut down or possible cut downs of embassies. And, we're already seeing funding cuts already in a lot of African countries. How might this diplomatic scaling back alter US soft power, including, like you mentioned, the educational exchange, the public health cooperation, and most important, counterterrorism and partnership across Africa that we've had with the US?
Just like I said, when you see an embassy or a consulate, and people see it as a pathway to get visa, but a whole lot of things happen in those consulates, in that embassy itself. And I've been privileged to actually go in and then see what happens. You have a political unit, and within the political unit itself, what they are doing is like they are doing a lot of heavy lifting. They are collecting a lot of information about the weaknesses of your country. I know somebody will say that sounds like a CIA system, but they're doing a lot of research, understanding the socioeconomic, the ethno-religious, they're understanding a whole lot of things. And all those information, those bits of work, those angle of research that they are conducting feed into how the US responds to a crisis in Africa. For instance, when elections is coming on board, because of hard work that has gone in the past, they know potential areas where there could be, I would call it clashes or all those things. And based on the research they've conducted, US make informed decisions. There are question mark about whether those decisions are informed, whether they are being governed by some preference or other things. We could raise those arguments. But at least to some degree, they are collecting those information. Now, if you're reducing that, and then you're scaling down on funding, it means that definitely your policy standpoint will not be grounded on evidence. It will be grounded on presumptions and perceptions that people give to you as the US, even if you intend to support what's going on in Africa, right? Or maybe what's going on in Nigeria. And that means the impact of your spending will not be as profound as it used to be. And that raises a whole lot of questions. Why are you doing that? So, I mean, it's the US, they have reasons why they will want to scale down on things. My big takeaway here is that it's going to affect the kind of policy that comes out of DC and how those policy one way or the other impact Africa. That's one. Two, if you scale down on that, it simply means that opportunities also to interact and consult widely. Remember, democracy is built on the foundation of consultation. You call democracy government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Essentially, the whole principle around democracy is on the whole concept of public participation, where policymakers and the people that the supply side and the demand side, they sit on the table and then they interact, they have that conversation so that they have a clarity. But when you're taking that away, it simply means that you want to sit down in DC and then make policy across board and let everybody just take it in itself. I think it's going to weaken the US influence in Africa. And yes, just like you said, it opens opportunity for other countries, maybe in the EU, maybe in Asia, maybe it's China, maybe it's India, maybe it's Pakistan, depending on the country. Maybe it's even Nigeria, even Africa. If we get ourselves well, we can begin to use those holes, right? That the void that the US is opening to actually position your country into those spaces. And then, of course, begin to use those things to your own advantage. But that's where it puts us. But if you're looking at it from the standpoint of the US citizen, I would say, yes, it's not good for them. If you look at it from the standpoint of the Chinese, they will say, oh, this is brilliant for us, opportunity for us to get influence. I mean, even without their presence in Africa already, they have a lot of influence. You can imagine what will happen if the US now gets off
Backs
all of
out,
those
yeah.
influence. Exactly. And then you see Russia also, you could see what they've done in West Africa in terms of their influence, and you know the potentials of that. And again, you have to be conscious also of terrorism itself ISWAP. ISWAP is still in Nigeria, still playing around the Lake Chad Basin, and what influence they will most likely have around that area also. So it's a whole big talk. I think it's painful that this is happening now, but it's inevitable. At some point, we are going to take this shock. I think it's how we respond as Africans to begin to fix the challenges. I mean, for instance, look at Nigeria. At some point in Nigeria's history, we decided we wanted to build Abuja, and then we built Abuja. At some point in our history, we said we are going to build Third Mainland Bridge. We built it, right? So we need to make a concerted decision among ourselves that yes, we need to fix our country. We need to begin to put things in place. We need to make our cities livable. We need to make our towns livable. We need to make sure that everybody have pipe-borne water. We need to fix our hospital systems. We need to fix our school systems. Let's make those decisions and let's begin to use our resources to actually tackle those problems. It's not going to be an easy pack, an easy walk, but definitely the problem of man is actually man-made, and definitely there are man-made solutions to these problems. The truth is that we have solutions to every singular problems that we have in the world. In Nigeria, the problems of Nigerians, there are solutions to it. It's just for us to begin to fix those problems.
I mean, it's interesting. It's always Nigeria solving our problems. So Nigeria for Nigeria.
Yes.
Let's move on to our second story. We had Nigeria submitted its ECOWAS schedule of tariffs order to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat. This marking a major step towards deepening trade integration across Africa. But however, why did Nigeria delay in submitting its tariff schedule for 5 years after ratifying AfCFTA? And what does this timing signal about its internal political and economic calculations?
I mean, the first thing to think about is the fact that the US had placed tariff for Nigeria, right? Despite the fact that we hardly even sell anything to the US, to be candid. Um, Maybe because of the economic challenges that we've had in recent history, historically, after the US stopped buying Nigerian crude, we really do not sell anything to them. We rather take things from them. And so it was shocking that the US placed a 14% tariff on Nigeria on all our goods. I don't even know, of course, Nigeria is not even in the best position to begin to negotiate. So the only thing we can do as a country is to begin to look closely at Africa. Who can we sell to? And one of the biggest outputs coming out of Nigeria today that is creating a lot of friction is maybe even how we put our crude into refineries and then we shut out those refineries. And so the need for us to begin to sell those products across to Africa. Remember, it's not just the PMS, it's not just the AGO, it's not just the DPK, also the petrochemical that comes out of that, the fertilizers that come out of the process, the petrochemicals that come out of the process, the LNGs that come out of the process. How do we push that across? Who do we sell to in this new world that we find ourselves? Our biggest market now, whether we like it or not, for manufactured goods remains in Africa. And it's important for us to begin to push things in Africa. On the flip side of things also, there are some goods that we need, industrial feedstock, that we need to keep our industry going. For instance, if you look at Nigeria, for instance, you look at the poultry industry of Nigeria, it relies heavily on corn from the US. At some point in time, that corn was blocked and banned by policies of government, by the trade policies of government. And then what happened is that the price of poultry product actually did skyrocket. Of course, we come down to food price later. When that happened, sometimes I think 2 years ago, there was a temporary lifting on ban on it, and they allowed some few oligarchs within the Nigerian, close to Nigerian government to begin to bring in some of those products. But even till today, if you talk to a classical poultry farmer in Nigeria, they will tell you one of their biggest challenges is finding maize, finding corn to produce feed from their stock. So the big question now is that with this new trade agreement, with the struggle of Nigeria to get even more dollars, where can we turn to if we are looking for corn, for instance? I mean, you could turn to Africa. I know there are still tariffs and all those things around those things, but we can turn to Africa for, I'll call it for salvation. I mean, Nigeria should actually be leading this conversation, but we're there now. I think what this thing puts us is that it eliminates almost 90% of tariffs on goods and services, and then it offers roughly about 50% tariff cuts for products, especially from least developed countries also within Africa. And that essentially means that we can buy things from the poor at not too expensive price. And the truth is that we don't have to look for dollars, maybe in future, to buy those goods. And then we can also try to sell. You see, if you look at one of our biggest exports, it's manufactured goods to the whole of West Africa. And that was why it was very painful when Buhari's government actually did shut the border, prevented our manufacturers from selling goods to West Africa. And most of those goods were replaced by other goods. So how do we go back again to begin to correct things? I think we are there now. So my take here is that I think the necessity, the global trade imbalances, and then the war that Trump has, I'll call it, is it Buhari-tized, right? Because I'm beginning to see Trump thinking exactly the way Buhari thinks, not having a clear thought of mind, distorting things without thinking things through, and then creating a big crisis. That happened in the world. Whether we like it, that's the fact that we find ourselves. So for us as Africa, where do we have influence? What kind of influence do we have? The first point of call for us as Africans, as Nigerians, is actually to look at what we can do in Africa. We could trade with South Africa. We could trade with Kenya. We could trade with people around us. Let's start that first, and let's see what we can do. And then from that, we can use that as the basis and to begin to build our economy. But I will end by saying this, that trade is not the ultimate goal for Nigeria. We have a huge population. For a country like Nigeria, I think the key factor that we need to look at is how we can put money in the pocket of our, we could empower them with skills, with jobs, with income to be able to pick up. We need to build a very thriving consumer market. And that consumer market cannot be built on the back of trade. That is the reality we find ourselves now. Of course, I know since SLAP era, we've been trying to build Nigeria economy on the back of trade. It's going to work. It has not worked and it has failed. We need to reverse course. We need to look at, okay, where can we find raw materials? How can we get those raw materials into the country at the cheapest possible cost? How can we turn those raw materials into goods? How can we give it out, whether to ourselves or whether to other Africans? And then from there, we can now begin to build that thing. So key thing I would say, just back to your question so that I don't go off trajectory. The first one is the need to rebalance our economy and to diversify our trade systems. I think that's one of the reasons why we are seeing that happen now. Two, I think it's part of the post-COVID economic strategy of the government. If you look at the AfCFTA concept and then the whole thinking around it, after COVID, before COVID, a lot of things were there, but after COVID, a lot of things slowed down. It's part of the strategy already. I think maybe they have to accelerate it now. The whole concept of digital trade and e-commerce expansion is actually to leverage technology to reach markets we've not get into, which is good. I think it's part of the policy, in part by design. If you look at the development plan of Nigeria that was designed around 2020, 2021, it had a bit of that in it. And then more importantly, I think the need for actually to use our political with our influence and institutional maturity to begin to get things on board. I think those are the fundamental building block of why we are here.
Sure, that's interesting. So let's move on to our final story. SBM Intelligence latest Jollof Rice Index titled Staple Under Stress. And this report showed a sharp rise in food cost in Nigeria. I mean, we went from the price of cooking one pot of jollof rice from 21,300 in September 2024 to 25,486 naira by March 2025. How are the rising food costs likely to shape household consumption patterns? I know we have talked over and over again about inflation, and now we can see it right from the Jollof Rice Index. It's clearly showing the pattern at which inflation is going up and deepening inequalities in, our already economic vulnerable communities. But what most importantly can Nigerian government do to address this issue as well?
I think the first one is the high, the household level response. What can you do as a person when in real time your income is reducing, and then the price of goods, the price of food to feed your children, let's say you have six, seven children, you have two wives that you have to take care of, and your income is reducing, what can you do? If you think about it, the first thing you can do is maybe to substitute the food instead of rice. Maybe they drink a lot of gari, but gari is now even more expensive than rice. So what can you do? I mean, the first thing is to think about food substitution, right? Whether there are a cheaper alternative that people could go for. And if you look at the market, is there. That's why you see people buying. Is it shaft? I think I saw a video of on YouTube of somebody buying shafts of pasta that looks like spaghetti, right? The industrial waste that should actually be fed to pigs. We find a situation whereby people are now paying money to buy that to feed their family. Sad to see. So that's what you see: food substitute, people looking for cheaper alternative, and those within those cheap alternatives that they are looking for, you know that it comes with its own risk, and those risks can actually have material effect and even bodily harm, can cause them bodily harm. The second is either you reduce the number of meals. Maybe you are used to eating five wraps of fufu, maybe you have to now cut it down to one, meaning that you grow leaner. You have to change all your wardrobes, and then understanding that your wardrobes also it's expensive to exchange, but that's the alternative you have. This is not sounding funny, but that's what people are doing, to be candid. And then the third one is maybe to begin to use concept of bulk purchasing to actually reduce cost. Instead of going to that small retailer close to you, you group together and then you try to buy things in bulk, hoping that things will be cheaper. But we all know that to even find that money to buy things in bulk doesn't even exist. It's sad, and that's why we always say that food inflation is a tax on poor people. It's a tax on. So anytime you see 30% food inflation, what it essentially means is that the government is taking 30% of your income away from you in terms of tax inflation. And the core of this issue, and we've complained so much about this, is the arbitral money creation. If you look closely at the numbers, last year, March last year, the base money of Nigeria was 23 trillion naira. We were complaining that, oh, Buhari government printed a lot of money. Tinubu government have been printing money. Between last year and March of this year, that thing had grown up by 10 trillion naira. Additional 10 trillion had been printed. And the implication is there for everybody to see. So in terms of how can government respond? I think there's a need, whether we like it or not, to have a targeted food aid and social protection program. We need to help the most vulnerable among us. At least if it's I know, yeah, it sounds weird. It sounds like what people will call an APC agenda or something. We need to find a very subtle way of helping the poorest among us. Across Europe, they have a social protection program. In the US, they have a social protection program. Virtually everywhere in the world, except maybe in Africa, we don't have social protection program. If you don't have income, you can go and die hungry. That's not how the world should work. And if you're a religious person, you say, oh, because if you read the Bible even was explicit. I know I'm sounding religious now. The Bible says you will always have the poor with you. Always. There will always be poor people in every community. And that's why if you are that one of the top 1% that you are earning above $1 million a month, you need to have it in your mind that yes, because I'm among the top 1% in Nigeria. What can we do to actually help those that are suffering? You have to have that from the humanitarian angle. But from the government policy angle also standpoint, we need to design a social protection program. Whether it's going to be something like a food stamp that you give somebody a card and then you put a cap on it. You can go to any restaurant, any private restaurant of choice around you, but you can only buy this type of food. Then people can go there so that people don't die hungry. I think we need to put that on board. Then there's a lot of price gouging. I always tell people that in Nigeria, a lot of things that you see are not inflationary. They are also price gouging. Although sometimes we tend to confuse both contexts together, but both concepts together. Um, in Nigeria, once there is scarcity, people jack up price arbitrarily beyond reach because they want to quickly cash out their profit. We need to stop those kind of things. It's bad, and those things are even criminal in most countries. We need to stop that. Then the concept of all-in. I remember during COVID period, um, some middlemen were going across and they were jumping before COVID. They were jumping from picking up goods, buying food products from people, and they were storing it. As at that time, there were questions around that. Why are you buying these things and storing it? They already presumed that they were going to store it so that when their career crisis, when scarcity comes on board, they can jack up the price of goods. And that's what they did. They made a lot. In fact, it's so easy. With a little bit of money, you can do the fact. Just imagine you having 100 billion naira loose cash in Nigeria that you are not doing anything with. You can literally buy up virtually all maize or maybe all beans that you can find in Nigeria, store it in one warehouse, and when the price of beans go up, you can now double the price or even put 25% on it, and then you make a whole lot of money. That's what you see happening in Nigeria. And there's no policy decisions that government is taking to put a hand to this thing. More importantly, we need to invest in the agricultural sector. I've mentioned this before. If you look at the implements and the tools that we use for agriculture in Nigeria, and you go to a museum anywhere in the world, and you go to the old Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, the equipment humans were using 2,000 years ago to farm is way better than what Nigeria is using in 2025. We need to put a hand to that nonsense. I think it's an embarrassment for people to be using old and cutlass to farm in Nigeria. The government needs to bring on board a policy that ensures that at least on a minimum, close to 500,000 tractors are actually brought on board and financed, maybe on a PCP program or something, on a financing program, or maybe on a leasehold kind of program. We need to implement something like that and put tools, put machines in the hands of people so that they can begin to produce goods and services. They can begin to produce agricultural produce rather than relying on all cutlass and hoe to plant. It doesn't make any sense. So we need to put that. Overall, I think we need to look close at even indulging. We need to begin to think regionally as Nigeria. Nigeria, 220 million people. We need to look at Burkina Faso. We need to look at the country that sits on top of us, which is Nigeria. They have a lot of desert land. How can we rehash the Lake Chad Basin? How can we begin to reforest most of those places and turn them into maybe far farms to feed our beef and all those things? We need to think widely. We cannot just sit down in Nigeria and continue to talk about how do I give this person 500 naira, 300 naira. We need to begin to think like human beings and stop all these regimented 10-8C policies that we keep throwing around in the country. I think at some point, as a country, we need to sit up and begin to do things like human data intellectual.
Interesting. I know that we're almost running out of time, but I just wanted to put I know you mentioned adopting policies that work. So we have seen previous governments adopt conditional cash transfer, food aid. We saw the homegrown feeding program, which I'm not sure is still working at this moment. We also saw the establishment of the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation and the Social Registrar. So how can Nigeria as a country ensure that when we make social safety nets as this, that it continues and it stays for a long sustainable term as opposed to short term and one government comes and changes it all?
I think yes. I think that's the problem that we have in Nigeria. The problem is that when we think through policy, we tend to neglect a very important aspect of which is the last mile. Now, when you look at most of all these policies that you mentioned, the last mile was riddled in a lot of secrecy, it lacks transparency, and as such, the intended beneficiary of this program did not get what they want, or they that's the perception that they did not get it, and there's no way of documenting whether they got it or not. I remember the rice pyramid, and we can talk about a whole lot of anchor borrowers program. People will tell you, is the friend of the CBN governor, and people are related with the friends of the friends, got the anchor borrower. Nobody got anything. The problem is simple. It has to do, at the heart of this thing, the systemic problem here is simple. We do not measure up when it comes to our last mile. In every country, there are three types of audits. You have the financial audit, you have the performance audit, and then you have the compliance audit. Those three pillars of audit are critical, acting at the last mile for you to be able to ensure that effective policy gets to its intended beneficiary. Let me give you a good example. I remember some few years ago, we're doing some work with smallholder women farmers across the country. I think over between 500,000 to 2 million of them. And there's a gender policy on agriculture that says that 30% of every support that government gives to farmers should go to women farmers. Now, in Abuja, the government package up a whole lot of things, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's amenities and all those things, and then they pull it up and then they give it across to each state. The state takes it up and distributes it to the local government. Then the local government distributes it to the people. That's the question. Is that if you go to every local government and say, who did you give? They don't know. There's no record on who they gave. There's no audit by the Auditor General that has been empowered to conduct the audit to see whether even the local government are there to the gender policy on agriculture, that 35% of who got that thing actually got it. There's no performance audit to ascertain whether the intended beneficiary, which are supposed to be farmers, smallholder farmers, got what they need to get. And as such, what happens? Most of these things grow wings and end up in the hands of few politicians. Remember COVID? They store it in warehouse and use it for political campaign. And that's why we have said you need to empower the office of the Auditor General, not just sitting in Abuja, take reports from the Accountant General, look at the numbers, and then can jot up something and write one audit report and throw it into the mix and say, this is my audit report. That is too shallow for the Auditor General. I think the Auditor General of Nigeria needs to be called to question here. You need to pick up every singular policies of government and begin to do compliance audit, begin to do performance audit, involving the citizens in the process. It's not about sitting in Abuja. Go to the last mile of things. Go to a local government, ascertain whether government policy got to the intended beneficiaries, and publish your report. Let people see that, and then people can use that as a working tool to begin to take corrective measures. Whether it's a process problem, we can now begin to see and begin to map out where the problem is. But the problem in Nigeria is that we don't do audits. We are not accountable for actions that we take. The same thing, if you go to a university getting certificate, your university certificate, there's no audit that happens there. Every little turn that you go to, I mean, whether it's every service point, at some point in time, I think when the former vice president was acting president, that's Vice President Osibajo, I think it was clear to all that he signed in an executive order saying that we should map out things. Well, it's sad. I think I will end by saying that we just need to fix what we need to fix. And once we fix that, definitely, and put up those systems and processes in place, things will find its way out.
Thank you so much, Samuel. That was really an interesting conversation. It's always interesting having this conversation with you. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thank
To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comment section. For deeper insights into our work, like our report that we had today, the Jollof Rice Index, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates shaping the African continent.